On Thursday, April 21st, Hiller baseball battled Ashland. Hopkinton leading 6-5 heading into the bottom of the fifth.
Always seems to be in the mix, that Joey Carazza.
Line up and the pitch, and he gets a piece of this one into center field. It goes. Pagliuca around to score. An RBI single for Carazza. That makes it a 7-5 Hiller lead.
As I was saying, he's sort of always in the fray.
And this is hit high in the air to right field towards the fence. And it's not going to be caught. Carazza's going to score. And now Locke going to head to third base. Here he goes, slides in, he's safe. An RBI triple. And it's an 8-5 Hillers lead. And he gets a big piece of this one over to left center. Could be trouble. That's going to drop in. A run already in. And still rolling in the outfield. Bernie going to head over to third base. And that is where he will stay. An RBI triple. It is a 9-5 Hillers lead. Been a lot of action.
Like 4 hours old already.
And this is ripped into center field. That's going to get down. Bernie is around to score. And it's going to make it a 10-5 game as Petruni slides in to second base with the RBI double.
Hillers plate 4 more runs, take the 10-5 lead, and would end up winning via mercy 15-5 in the bottom of the sixth. On Sunday, April 24th, Hiller baseball battled Holliston. Prior to the game, they recognized Hiller Hall of Famer Fred Murphy of the class of 1961, who passed away recently.
This year, we added the initials FM in honor of Mr. Fred Murphy. And I don't like fully how it came out, but it's still on there. And Fred is a man, Mr. Murphy, I should say, I feel awkward calling him Fred, is someone that is a legend in Hopkinton, as I said. And, well, we'll talk a little bit about him in a minute. Mr. Fred Murphy was a 1961 graduate of Hopkinton High School. While in high school, all he did was serve as student council and class president. He was a 3-sport star in football, basketball, and baseball. Legend has it that he hit the farthest home run in Hopkinton High School history. I want the Murphys to know that his record is safe with these guys.
Scoreless game heading into the bottom of the third.
Carazza's got a big lead over at third base.
Line up in the pitch. Hit in the air over to center field. Could be trouble. And a collision between the shortstop and center fielder. And Carazza's going to come around to score. Peters winds and deals. And that is going to drive in a run. A little chin music for the walk. And Nick Pahara comes around to score. Line up and the pitch. And this is hit in the air over to left field. Could be trouble. It is caught. Runner from third is going to tag. Here comes Dylan Locke around to make it a 3-0 game. A sacrifice RBI flyout by Gone.
Hillers plate 3 runs and would end up taking the game 4-0. On Monday, April 25th, Hiller softball hosted Holliston. Hillers leading 2-0 in the bottom of the second, and this happens.
And she gets a great piece of this one over to left center. See you later. Home run. A 2-run blast by Caroline E. Simone. And it's 5-0 Hillers. Absolutely crushed her second home run of the season.
Hillers took the 4-0 lead, but Holliston fought back, and we went into extra innings with the score tied at 8 apiece. Kelsey McCoy at the plate in the bottom of the 8th.
Up the middle, and that'll get into center field. Game-winning run being waved around. The throw off the mark, and the Hillers win. An RBI base hit by Kelsey McCoy as Sarah Pessin, the pinch runner for Cedia, comes around to score.
She knocks in the winning run, and Hillers take the 9-8 walk-off win over previously undefeated Holliston. On Tuesday, April 26th, Hiller boys track and field took a dominant 122-14 win over Medfield. Hillers swept through 8 events and both relays. They took first place for the victory. Hiller girls track and field took the 85-51 win over Medfield. The Hillers swept in all 3 throwing events to help edge out Medfield. On Wednesday, April 27th, Hillers softball improved to 4 wins and 3 losses with a 21-4 road win over Ashland. It is their first time above 500 this season. Ashland baseball got some revenge, hosting Hillers, taking them down 13-12 on April 27th. Hiller baseball now stands at 4-2 on the season. Hiller boys lacrosse falls to 2-5 on the season with a 9-2 loss versus a very good Dover Sherborne team on April 27th. Hiller girls lacrosse kept it close with one of the best in the TVL, Dover Sherborne, but fell short 13-10. They are now 0-7 on the season. Hiller boys tennis remains unbeaten with a sweep over Ashland on April 27th. They improved to 6-0 overall. Hiller girls tennis also swept Ashland, improving to 6-1 on the season. On this edition of HCAM Sports Talk, we head over to the Hopkinton Center for the Arts, in which the Boston Globe hosted a forum discussing their 125 years of Boston Marathon coverage.
Editor at the Boston Globe, a position I've held for just shy of 4 years. I've been at the Globe since 2009, however, and prior to becoming sports editor, I was the digital sports editor for both Boston.com and BostonGlobe.com, and I've participated in the Globe's coverage of every Boston Marathon since I arrived here. People often ask me when they learn both what I do and that I'm a runner myself, if I run the Boston Marathon every year, and I can't help but laugh. I wish I did, because I think that would be easier. And I am in no way minimizing what it takes to run 26.2 miles. In fact, covering the Boston Marathon as a journalist is an endurance event of its own kind. And like the Boston Marathon, there's a certain satisfaction to be had amid the pain and the process. We start crazy early in the morning and we produce live updates throughout the day on things like the weather, the crowds, and of course, the amazing athletes who live out their dreams on the streets of Massachusetts. We watch the finish closely for the best storylines. We monitor what the elite runners do and say, and we search for the most compelling stories, and there are thousands of them. We assign a small army of journalists, reporters, photographers, columnists, web producers, and editors who fan out from Hopkinton to Boston to bring our subscribers the most comprehensive coverage of the world's greatest race. We upload it all to our website throughout the day, and then we produce a newspaper with all that copy. It's a fascinating process, and it's one we hope to take you behind the scenes of tonight with this presentation. I was thrilled when Arthur Dion first reached out to me about possibly doing an exhibit based on the Globe's coverage of the Boston Marathon, because I'm incredibly proud of what we do each year. and the Globe was happy to help make this come to life. I was even more thrilled when Erin McGran emailed me in March to let me know that it was really happening. So here's a special thank you to Erin and her staff. Now, let me please introduce our panelists. And I apologize for not being able to be there, but COVID is what it is, and this is for the best. Although I am very close nearby. I live in Medway, so I'm only a short ways away. I wish I could be there. I apologize for not. First, Chris Waldman is the co-director of the coverage exhibit. John Powers is the Globe's brilliant master of Olympic-style sports coverage, who has been covering the Boston Marathon since the 70s. Mary Kate Shea, the Boston Athletic Association's Director of Professional Athletes and Technical Support. Kendra Butters is the Boston Athletic Association's Director of Communications. And Greg Lee is the Globe's Senior Assistant Managing Editor for Talent and Community, and is also a former Globe Assistant Sports Editor and a former president of the National Association of Black Journalists. He is also someone who taught me how to cover marathons when I first arrived, so I owed Greg a little debt of gratitude. So I hope you enjoy the program, and we'll dive right in with some questions, and forgive me if I don't know when to pick up and move on to the next one, but fingers crossed, hopefully this works. The first question is for Chris Waldman, our exhibit co-producer. And let's talk about putting this exhibit together. And when we spoke, we certainly talked about the notion of newspaper pages as art, but I do think it's very informative to hear you speak about how it came together, the process you went through to put these, to make these selections and to decide what ended up in this really beautiful exhibit in the gallery.
Thank you, Matt. I'm so sorry that you can't be here with us. And welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us tonight. So as Matt said, Arthur and I cooked this idea up about 3 years ago. I was thinking about what fresh take we could do on the theme of our annual marathon show. The year before, we had photographs and memorabilia from the BAA archives. And I just was really looking to do something very different from what we normally do in the gallery. So I enlisted Arthur Dion to brainstorm with me. And Arthur is Director Emeritus of Boston's Gallery Naga and had helped me install many shows in the gallery. So he's brimming with great ideas. And so we batted around some thoughts and came up with this concept of showing the history of the marathon through the eyes of the globe. And we were really excited about it. We just thought, tracing through time the evolution of the look of the globe and the types of things that were reported on, as well as the evolution of the marathon, would be fascinating and just make for a really visually interesting show. So then we realized, well, actually, we have to get practical about this and consider, how are we going to do this? How are we going to approach the globe and ask them for 125 years of reporting when they don't know us from a hole in the wall? But Arthur boldly charged ahead and contacted you, Matt. And I believe you said, actually, I think it's a good idea. And fortunately, we were able to go from there. You set us up with Jerry Mannion, the amazing librarian and archivist, from whom we asked, Jerry, can you send us the first page of the paper from every day since 1897, the day after the marathon, and while you're at it, send us the first page of the sports section? And fortunately, he agreed. So that was it. That really made made the show for us. It was just a matter of culling through these images and picking out about 29, 30 that we knew would show well in the gallery. Picking them was a really fun challenge. Our first time through, of course, we looked at everyone very carefully, and we just pulled out things that jumped out to us immediately. It might have been a really powerful headline, or a shocking headline, or a big, beautiful photograph, or things that struck us as humorous, like I think there's a page that has more ads on it than articles, and features things like elixirs that cure bed sores and kidney ailments. So we just loved this tracing of history and seeing the evolution of, for example, the way women were initially represented to how they are honored now. And we found themes that seemed to carry through, and then just kept culling and culling and thinking about those themes as we developed the show. And here we are.
Excellent. Yes, Jerry Mannion is the unsung hero of the Globe. Let's turn to John Powers, who has been chronicling the Boston Marathon among many other sports events in the pages of the Globe and certainly on our website for many years now, and a master storyteller, to say the least. John, I'll turn to you to ask about the changes you've seen over the years in how the Globe covers the marathon. What are some of the great moments of Globe coverage, and perhaps some that we might regret or we wish we'd done differently? I'm certainly curious about what you've seen in the evolution of coverage.
What was interesting early was that we had a morning and an afternoon paper when I got there in 1974 with separate staffs. So it was an all hands on deck. I'm probably getting a reverb here. If you weren't doing the Red Sox game at Fenway, you were doing the marathon. So I'm very familiar with Hopkinton because my first 4 or 5 years, I was out here every year. I was the kid. So do the start, kid. So after the 4th year, I'd done everything I could think of. And I did a story about the woman who owned a house near the starting line in the pre-porta potty era. So everybody who got caught short would knock on her door, use her facility, and then sign a guest book. And I said, yeah, but everyone knew that woman. So over the years, as the race got bigger and bigger and the staff got a little smaller, we went down to one newspaper. We weren't doing quite as much, but the idea was to do as much as you could on the things that people really wanted to read about, especially when the running boom really hit big. And Billy Rogers, Alberto Salazar, and Johnny Benoit were huge, so there was a lot of interest there. But the two things that stick out to me, because they involved the whole paper, were the Rosie Ruiz race in 1980 and the year of the marathon bombing, because we needed to pivot. There's a story we thought we'd be writing, and then there was a story we ended up writing with virtually no notice. And what happened then is the whole paper, Metro, the city desk gets involved in a big way, especially with the bombing. And don't forget, this was a holiday for everybody. So all the sports writers were on duty, nobody else was. So they were calling people in who thought they were having a day off. And the Globe the next year won the Pulitzer Prize for, I think, the exhausting, quote unquote, and empathetic coverage of that day. So I think that's what we have learned, is the race doesn't always turn out the way you think it will, especially given the crazy weather hereabouts. We have no idea. Is it going to be a run for the hoses, as Chuck Fultz can tell, as he can tell you, or is it going to be 38 degrees? But I think those are the things that I remember most. The one thing I wish we'd probably done a little better was in the early 80s, understanding the degree to which the race was falling behind in the favor of the top runners, partly because they weren't giving prize money. The idea was to run for a bowl of beef stew and a medal. And it was turning out in the early 80s that wasn't quite enough. Finally, John Hancock comes in, they offer prize money in 1986. The race changed utterly. You have top African runners coming here. We probably should have known early on and seen that coming. But we are the Boston Globe. We tend to be a bit parochial. I was telling someone that it's the only story I write about where I don't mention how many miles in. I'll say at the Firehouse Turn, or at Heartbreak, or at Coolidge Corner. And one of the Kenyon runners once said, well, at the 30K mark, and I'm thinking, where's the 30K mark? So I think it was that kind of Boston-focused thing where I remember some of you certainly were here in 1960 when the talk of the new Boston came up, right? People say, what's wrong with the old Boston? So I do think that we were a little bit slow to pick up on that, but I think mostly what we've tried to do is to give the readers what we think they're interested in at any given time.
Excellent. Yeah. In fact, now we're at the point where we have certain people who go into the race day without an assignment at all, and they stand by for what to do. And one of the things we're going to do this year is actually use Google search trends to figure out what are the stories readers really want to see. We've always used a lot of other things, but this will be a first for us based on our experience in October. I will turn now to Mary Kate Shea, who helps organize the elite field. And let's face it, this is, after all, a major international sporting event, and its front-end competitors are major leaguers. So Mary Kate, are they portrayed accurately and fairly as compared to treatment of stars in other sports? And are there moments of coverage of the elites that stand out to you over the years?
Those are great questions. Thanks, Matt. And wish you were here too. A Boston Marathon champion is here in the audience, Jack Fultz. So I think the first question is, so just a little bit of context. So I grew up on the South Shore, and Patriots Day was always a holiday and always part of our lives. I grew up in a very large athletic family, and you always knew when the Boston Marathon was happening. And you always obviously had the Globe, even though I was delivered the Boston Herald at the time. Only when my brothers couldn't, broke their arms or something. Anyway, so growing up, you always looked forward to Patriots Day because you had it off from school. But I was also a runner from very early on, from junior high. So you knew you had the day off. So you would go to track practice. You'd go up the hill, you'd take bus 222 to the Red Line, take the Red Line to eventually get to the Back Bay, and you'd go along Comm Ave right before Hereford, and that's where you'd stay for years and years and years. But at the same time, you read everything about the Boston Marathon. So the pre-race coverage in the week leading up, Saturday especially, Sunday especially, and Monday, to have those race results of every single finisher. And you would go down and you'd be like, hey, I know that person. And you just go through every single column. That was a highlight. But what the Globe did for us, as well as giving the mass participant or the mass spectator something to look forward to on Patriots Day, was they made those elite runners, those professional runners, into household names. So everybody knew whether or not you were a runner, Jack, Greg, Joni, Bill, Alberto, and then you got to know Ernst, and then you got to know Catherine the Great Dereba, and Uta Pippig, and Joni, and Dina, and Robbie Kipkoch's Chariot, and Meb, and Des, and Shalane, and Ryan, and we could go on forever, because working with the pros, we brought in about 900 professional athletes from 48 countries since we started bringing in the pros. That's a lot of athletes since the mid-'80s. So you have really brought to life these athletes, made them interesting, shared their stories. Wesley Career, his brother was bitten by a snake, a black mamba snake. His mother couldn't get his brother to the hospital. Wesley Career won the Boston Marathon. He fell to his knees. He pointed to the sky. He went home and built a hospital. Not by himself, but he built a hospital with Ryan Hall, who has the American course record at Boston. So the moments that stick out for me, I was trying to narrow it down because I've been a real fan of this sport. I can't tell you what kind of car you drive, but I can tell you in 2011, Jeffrey Mutai ran a 203.02, and Moses Mosop ran a 203.06. And I could probably tell you a lot more stats because I'm kind of geeky that way. And there are a lot of people at the BA now who I love working for because they're also geeks. So we get to talk shop quite a bit. I said to Chris Lotzbaum, who works with Kendra, let's just throw out 5 years, and I want to see if your years match my years. And a lot of them did. So the years that, and the photos especially, Pulitzer Prize winning photos and coverage, I've known John forever. John, but also Barbara Huebner and Shira Springer, wonderful women reporters who have reported on this event. Things that stand out for me. On race morning of 2014, a year after the bombing, Meb Keflezighi, they have to show me their bib, their shoes, I make sure they have everything. Their kit, which is a uniform, everything is shown to me. And Meb came up and he put down his number. And in the corner of this bib were the 4 names of the people who had died the year before. And I thought I couldn't breathe. And it was such a moment. Because the year before, he couldn't run Boston. We had invited him and he got injured. And I had met him on the Boston Public Library steps right after the pros finished, right before the bombing. So all these little dynamics. And then he goes in one of the first fields I actually assembled was in 2013, devastating, and then in 2014, so I knew that year was going to be special. But it was the fastest field at that time ever assembled, and Meb prevailed. He took it out, he went for it. You guys, the Globe, got that iconic photo of him crossing the finish line and then hugging his wife and his children. And it was so memorable. So that's a big one for me. 2018, how do you not love Yuki Kawauchi and Des Linden? Battling through that storm. That's an iconic moment that the Globe covered, and the Globe covered that in an amazing, amazing fashion. 1966 to 68, I was barely alive. Those years with Bobby Gibb, historically, now that we can look back through the eyes of the Globe and through their historical archives, amazing. Yeah, I mean, I need to stop now because I'm talking too much.
I could listen forever, honestly. It's I think one thing we do when we go into this is we have a sense of history is about to be made every time one happens. And you know, and that's something that hangs over the coverage all the time is being aware of the moments and being aware of how meaningful it is to so many people. So thank you for all you do to assemble such a wonderful field and create such drama. Let's turn now to Greg Lee, who, as I mentioned, was an assistant sports editor when I first came to the Globe, and certainly taught me a lot about how to cover a marathon. Because prior to this, I had coincidentally worked in Middletown, New York, the home of Frank Shorter, who I know in Boston is, you know, nowhere near the stature of Boston Billy, but nonetheless a good rival. And he has a hometown race called the Orange Classic. It's actually the first time I ever participated in running was through that. And so I had a little background in marathons, but this was, you know, this was like going from the minors to the majors in one big step. And Greg was very instrumental in helping me. But I do think that it's important that that we talk about how both the marathon and the Globe have been guilty of marginalizing or treating differently many groups of people other than white men. Certainly the earliest years of the marathon were limited to white men, but sports have always been places for breakthroughs as well. We're about to celebrate Jackie Robinson Day in Major League Baseball. And I think every year the Boston Marathon is run, we celebrate the inclusion of women in the race as equal competitors. Our coverage is now geared equally toward both the men's and women's elite race. But Greg, what stands out to you from the exhibit and how groups of people have been represented? And if you could also talk about how media has changed to reflect new viewpoints and values through the lens of Boston Marathon coverage, I'd be interested to know your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Matt. Wish you were here. We're looking forward to seeing you in the office a couple of weeks when we go back to work. That's exciting. The one thing I saw in the exhibit I noticed from on the wall, it had 1951 and it had a headline, Jap Star in the top of the newspaper. Of course, there's different times, and seeing that is still jarring. I think that 1951 is the year my dad was born, and looking at it, looking at all the pages compared and looking at the years of evolution and how, you said women is accepted into the races. The marathon is a very international sport and having a lot of international athletes. But one thing that I thought about too was how sports always reflects your community. I'm a big believer in that, and anything that happens, it's a big unifier. And I think after seeing what happened to Albury running in the neighborhood, you think about it and see what the BAA has done with that in terms of all its work and advocacy, but he was running. And running is what? The core of the community of the Boston Marathon, the BAA. And seeing that story and reacting in a way that the BAA has in terms of that efforts, it brings the community together. And I'm a big, just like the tragedy of the bombing brought the community together in terms of the race. Anything that I'm a big believer that once things happen like that, it happens for a reason. And the last couple of years have really exposed that in terms of the social movement. And that's because of, I'm gonna go back a little bit, how we are more a digital world. Matt just mentioned about how he's gonna use Google Analytics to try to determine stories. Years ago, that would never happen. We don't know what people wanted to read because we didn't have these tools. And just like we have the tools of social media and websites, we are able to be exposed to other groups. You will see the growth of Black Women Run. There's a lot of groups and organizations that we never had any benefit of knowing before the digital age. We wouldn't have seen that. BAA, the Boston Globe, any media outlet wouldn't have seen it because, as we mentioned, as John mentioned before, Boston and Boston Globe is very kind of parochial. So you're not really exposed to that. And what as social media has done, good or bad, I look at it more of good, is that everyone has the opportunity to expose themselves, type in Google and find something. To me, you have no excuse of not knowing what groups are out there because you have it at your fingertips. So for me, there's no excuses today. And I think, when Matt mentioned about the whole, how we covered it early on, I think about it, how the Globe didn't cover a lot of things well back in the day. Like I'm reading about Yawkey and how the Boston Globe overlooked his racism in its coverage of the Red Sox not taking Jackie Robinson. Just think about if the Globe had questioned Yawkey. Jackie Robinson could be the home of Boston, not New York. Think about that. Think about that history, how great of a person and a symbol with Jackie Robinson would have been come out of Boston. Just think about that, if that was questioned. So in terms of the coverage, it's gotten better, it's gotten more diverse, and we can always improve. But when you look back at the history and look at how you think 1951 was a long time ago, but it really wasn't when I think about it, because, like I said, my dad was born that year. And I mentioned with John how when he started covering the marathon, I was born that year. so just think about those different things for me and how we've evolved over the years and how I think social media and the digital age has changed how we cover things and how we view things and expose people who probably never been exposed to things like Black Girls Run or other things of that sort, other organizations that are in the running community, and it's a great thing to see.
Agreed. There's no question that the use of modern analytics is good, and I don't mean to throw all of our colleagues from the past completely under the lead race truck, but
No.
Look, it's inevitable that when decisions are left entirely to people, biases can creep into those decisions, and the more we can use the analytics to improve how we do things and give everyone a say. The collective voice is more powerful than the individual, I think. And like you said, Greg, the social media helps inform us about what the collective voice wants to see. So with that, and thank you for your excellent answer. Let's turn to Kendra, who I work very closely with on planning and organizing coverage of the Boston Marathon. And seems like we've gotten to know each other pretty well the past 6 months with two races in a short time span. But I'd love for you to explain to our audience on the connection between the Globe and the Boston Athletic Association these days, and how our organizations work together, but also independently. We obviously have our own goals. You put on a major race, we try to bring that race to our subscribers and a worldwide audience who potentially might subscribe. But your insight into the relationship there, I think, would be of interest to our audience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Matt. And a lot of the topics that I think have influenced the way that we work together have been mentioned, in responses even just earlier tonight. But, you really look at, especially this exhibit, and you think about how old Boston is, how old the Boston Globe is, and how old the BAA and the Boston Marathon are. And it really is interesting to kind of have this time capsule that is the Globe Archives that helps us tell the story of the Boston Marathon over the years. So even as we look back and you see the photos of, Catherine being kind of pushed aside, and you see the way that it was captured at that moment in time, because it's very easy for us to look back in time and have our own thoughts or memories. So it was interesting to kind of reflect on that as we were walking through. But I think especially in the digital age, as all these stories of not only 30,000 runners, our professional field, 500,000 spectators, there are so many stories that do come out of Marathon Monday, but also just the lead up to race day. So we really try to work closely, especially with Matt's team, to pitch those stories, to make sure that we are telling the unique story that you haven't heard before in the 126 years of covering the Boston Marathon, which honestly is challenging at times, but it's also a fun challenge to think through how can you make something that has been done by so many people for so many years unique and fresh and still have that perspective. And I think the digital transformation over the year is something that has really affected that. So, leading up to race day, I know that there's coverage on Boston.com, Boston Globe, fairly regularly of these really compelling stories of the everyday runner who might be raising money for a certain nonprofit, overcoming an adversity in their life, and seeing that coverage that the Globe puts out is something that really helps us really remember why we do what we do year over year. October's race being so unique in that you will never have a fall race ever again. This is plastic, but knock on wood. You'll never have even a race that falls on the 11th. So, even just thinking about those little fun facts and the ways that our teams work together, the BAA has a team of experts across the board. So I am by no means an expert on running. You asked me to comment on 1976. I won't even go there. I'll turn to Jack. But we have so many folks who are experts in those respective areas who can really kind of think about not only how do we help the Globe achieve their goals, but how do we ensure that we're also having our message and our key points come across through your reporting as well.
It works out pretty good, I think. And I know that every year, and we've done this twice in the past year, we have a planning meeting in which representatives of the BAA and representatives of the sports staff get together, and we just talk about the coverage, and it's a lot of listening on our part, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to bring stories to our readers ahead of time. Like, for instance, this week, this year's marathon has a heavy focus on the participation of women. And so Kendra and I met at an event in Boston back in December, and she gave me a very early heads up that immediately went onto our content plan for this year. And some of those stories are going to come up in the next few days, including the phenomenal team of women who basically run the BAA. And my apologies to Tom Grilk and Jack Fleming, who do a wonderful job, but I think you guys know who really runs the show, right?
Matt, Jack's in the audience.
I know.
So he can confirm.
You can't see him, but he is here.
It's a great relationship, and I very much appreciate the BAA's willingness to work with us on creating a really robust package of content that our readers really consume throughout the week leading up. So more to come in the pages of the Globe. So let's turn back to the exhibit, though. And Greg, I asked you already about what struck you from the exhibit. But I'd like to ask the rest of our panelists, starting with Mary Kate, about this exhibit specifically. Was there one thing that jumped off those walls more than any other? I can tell you what mine was. It was rereading John's lead to the Rosie Ruiz story, and just how foreshadowing that lead was. So maybe John, you can come back to that one, but Mary Kate, please, if you wouldn't mind starting.
All right, but don't you think people really want to know what has been John Powers' most favorite article he's written?
Yeah, that's on the list.
All right, that's on the list, okay. In the exhibit, which was phenomenally done, thank you, both of you, for putting that together. Just an amazing time capsule. At home in my attic, I have this stack of every Boston Marathon coverage in print, paper, and it was getting too big, so I had to go through it a couple of years ago and take out like the inserts, the extra pages that like may not have said something about running. So I still have this stack of papers. But in the exhibit out here, not only was it bringing me back to a number of races, but I did really appreciate Elijah Lagat and Getsang Abera. That photo finish actually was absolutely amazing. And after the race, I had spoken to Elijah Lagat and said, you know, what was that race like for you? And he said, a second can save a man. And he had won by 1 second. And what he meant is, you know, back home in East Africa, and in the rest of the world, actually, you know, sometimes a second can save you in all sorts of circumstances. So I thought that was a really amazing photo and coverage, because Abera went on to win the gold medal. And this year, we have the female gold medalist from Tokyo, by the way. So that's my answer, Matt.
Thank you. Okay, John, your turn. What stood out? But also, let's get right to the big questions. What is your favorite story after you tell us about the exhibit that you the portion of the exhibit you liked the best or jumped out at you? What's your favorite story to have written of the Boston Marathon over the years?
Well, I think just in terms of the exhibit, was extraordinary, especially going back and looking in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And there were stories about wars going on in the rest of the world, or we caught this murderer, and then, you know, Finn wins marathon. But you realize there's so many other things going on in the world that this was just one part of, and it kind of brings you back to in context, because we always thought of this as our race, this is a Boston thing. You realize it's a small dot on the map relative to everything else. Favorite race would have been Meb winning here, because the year before, when the bombing had happened, and I was writing my story in the Copley Plaza on the lead, and we heard the explosions, and I was going out, and Meb was there in the lobby, and he was just absolutely shattered. And the resolution, I saw the resolve in his face, I'm running this next year. He was not the favorite in that race. There are many faster people, and you could just tell the way he went out was so fast. People said, nah, Nuts, he'll never do it. And he was driven by something more than the talent, as I said, his inspiration of the 4 people who had died. And don't forget, an American had not won here in a long, long time. So to see him cross the finish line and all the emotion, and also knowing Meb, who's a wonderful gentleman, for all the years that we've had and all of the disappointments that he's had and the triumphs, that was a special moment. Just talking about Rosie, I had the women's lead that year, and we didn't know as much about the women's races then. Well, we knew who the favorites were, but there wasn't a separate women's start, so you ran in the whole body of the race. So I'm at the finish line, waiting to see who comes across, and it's not the woman I think I'm going to see. It's a woman who didn't look like a marathoner, looked like she'd just run a mile, not having been prepared to run a mile. Well, she crosses the line, and they immediately bring her up on the stand, put the laurel wreath on her, and bring her downstairs to the basement of the Prue. And Billy Rogers had won the race that year. He's sitting there. They plump Rosie down next to her. He said, "How are you?" "Who are you?" So meanwhile, there are questions about splits, and it's not quite adding up, and it's pretty clear she's not a marathoner. Now, Jock Semple, who was a marathoner and was the gatekeeper, he's saying, she's a phony, she's a phony. And Jackie Garreau, who did win the race, came in and she said, I never see this woman, I never see her. Patty Catalano, who thought she was second, is being third. And it got to be very uncomfortable fast. And Will Cloney, who was the race director, said, obviously there's a problem with the winner of the women's race. It took a week to straighten all that out. So I was in that story the whole week. They finally disqualified Rosie, brought Jackie back. It wasn't the same. She hadn't got what she really deserved. So a number of years later, she is the grand marshal of the race. So she comes in, you know, she does the course in the convertible. They stop just before the finish. She gets out and kind of, you know, trots across the finish line. So I talked to her and she said, I thought, oh my God, I just did what Rosie did.
I don't think I will ever forget the lead to that story though, John. It was just sports writing brilliance. It goes like this. Her name is Rosie Ruiz, and she came out of nowhere. So, good one.
Thank you.
Chris, how about you? You produced this, but you certainly must have an aspect that appeals to you more than others.
Thank you for asking me to follow John. I would say that observing how the portrayal of women runners has evolved over the years has been really thrilling. I mean, no longer do women have to hide the fact that they are female or jump out of the bushes in order to run the race. So I just think the celebration of that is really wonderful. And the Bush's story, of course, I'm referring to Bobby Gibbs, who was not allowed to run because women were deemed to be physically incapable. And what do you know, she actually came in ahead of 2/3 of the runners that year. So thank goodness she set the course. And it's actually a sculpture of her outside of HCA, done by her.
Excellent. Kendra, do you have a favorite part of the exhibit?
Yeah, I think especially this year with the 50th anniversary of 1972, I've been more closely looking at coverage from that year and kind of looking at the more extensive archives of that as well. And, you know, kind of to follow up to Chris, the emphasis in the headlines of the woman who, you know, won in 1972 it is very interesting to just kind of look at it in 2022 in that reflective manner. But also just since I've had the opportunity to go through the coverage from that whole period around the race, it's even helped our team find other stories. So, you know, in the pre-race coverage, it talked about the Boston 9 ladies, and I was walking through the office like, who's the ninth? Who's the ninth? And it was a ninth who was registered, but 8 ran that day. And then that led us to learn the story of when the 8 arrived that morning, they all made a pact to each other to finish no matter what. So we've really been able to kind of not only use that story in our own storytelling, but then also in you know, the 5 women we'll be bringing back this weekend and celebrating, really honoring kind of the bond and the weight of what they knew that they were doing at the time. So I think especially that coverage out there really spoke to me with that in mind.
Excellent. I know we only have a few minutes left, eight minutes to be exact, because I was told there's a hard stop at 8 p.m. But we certainly want to have audience Q&A, and for that, I'm not sure how to proceed. So
we can handle it, Matt. We can handle it, Matt.
Greg, would you mind taking over that?
I'll take it over for you, Matt. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a long time subscriber, not quite as long as the coverage of the marathon. I have a lot of friends that run from out of state, and they swear the coverage here is unbelievable. They buy it before the day of the race, the day of the race, and afterwards. They go on local papers, would never give it this coverage. Never, because you go to outstanding sports section. And I agree, across all the sports. Mr. Powers,
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Your stuff is just good.
Oh, thank you. I thought only my mother knew that, but then thank you.
I know it's been dancing around.
It's hard, because I've been dealing with this with the last several games, for the Winter and Summer Olympics where Russia was banned. How much do you blame the athlete for something that he or she may not agree with? Certainly had very little to do with. It's hard. I would have probably said if there's a way to vet them, but I don't think there is. Who really is, what we like about sports is that it transcends this thing. Hard position, because I know a lot of people, a lot of institutions, museums and those things have been barring Russian artists, Russian this, Russian that. Difficult to do. I would let them run, but again, this is something that you obviously don't have much time to plan for. I don't know how many athletes were involved, probably, 65, 70?
It's fewer than, yeah.
Again, I don't know what went into the thinking for it, but I think it's a very difficult issue because if you ban Russians today, who are you going to ban next year if there's an unpopular war then? I don't know. I don't think it's something that we've had to think of up until recently.
Sir.
Yeah, I've been a long-time Globe subscriber also, and I used to get it delivered at home, and I love that. The copies up in your attic. There's nothing like holding the Globe. Now I get it digitally, environmental reasons and all that, but the exhibit I wanted to take down, hold those pages, but I didn't. I think I have 2 or 3 things, and then just pick one of them. I don't know which one. One, for the BAA, I really love if the BAA would allow first-time qualifiers to run, regardless of their time. If they qualify from time, there are lots of experts here, and you guys think about that type of stuff. But that's just one thing that I think it would make the marathon open to more people versus maybe people who have run 20 or 30 years and frankly are mostly white. So I think that's an opportunity to open it up to others. I'd love the BAA to think about that. And I have no vested interest. I thought when I hit 60 I might make the qualifying, but it's getting worse. So I'm going the big route if I ever get to Boston. So that's one thing I was going to ask you about Ukraine. So I guess that's the only one I have at this point. Thanks. I just wondered if the BAA has any feedback on that.
And I guess this is where I can also give a little bit of a plug for the partnership of the Globe and BAA and kind of how we pitch stories. But I know Alex Spear has been working on a story specifically on, the qualifying times and the thoughts and really the process that goes into that and how far out we're projecting that. Certainly, due to field size, time on the road, and, we're in Hopkinton, which is an area that's certainly affected by the time that athletes spend here. But it's definitely feedback that we hear, and we know that when folks do have that first time running, and this year everyone who applied will achieve that, which is I think a pretty incredible feat, but we certainly do hear that from folks.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just first of all, as someone who ran Boston at the age of 58, it was my first marathon, and I had a number through the Hopkins Running Club, thanks to the BAA. So, support our supporters of all of these events. But I think it was Greg. What struck me going through the exhibit was kind of the juxtaposition of some of these world events in the context of the marathon. And specifically, I was looking at a couple of pages from World War II. How does the Globe make those decisions? How do you decide that question about how much coverage you can provide in the context of some of these other world events that we're facing?
Can I just respond to that? Because I was thinking about that all today. 126 years is a long time. And I started thinking, okay, 2019, Toronto beats Decisa by 2 seconds, and under the fold is Notre Dame Cathedral burning. You got the Icelandic volcano, you got the Japanese tsunami, you've got, popes dying. A lot happens in the spring, but do you have an answer to how you split the coverage?
Good with that.
Actually, Monday's gonna be my first time. I'm actually a Monday night editor, so I run the paper on Mondays. So Monday is my day for the first time to actually determine what's on A1, and so I'm gonna have to pay attention to what's going on around the world. Yes, world events happen. I mean, this is the first priority is that this is the biggest event of the city in our region. So, the Boston Marathon naturally will probably get the biggest play. But when we discuss in these meetings, we have 3 or 4 meetings during the day in terms of what we're going to decide what's the biggest news of the day. We then determine what gets the biggest picture, where the position of every story is going to be, which stories will make it to the front, which won't make it to the front. There are a lot of factors, like you said the other day, like you just said about the church burning and stuff. That news happens, and it's a big determination in terms of what happens around the world. And we hope there's nothing happens on a holiday. This is a holiday, so usually as people who produce the paper, we want a so-called easy day because we know it's we don't get many of them, and we know that it's a set story, and we like to have we like to have sometimes as a production person. 'Cause I'm a production person. We want to have sometimes already pre-planned, but when things go awry, like the bombing and everything else, we shift. We shift quickly. We have to do that. So basically, our decisions are made on what we see is really going on that day, because at the end of the day, the newspaper, the news organization is the historical record for that day. So we want to make sure we make the right call, because we don't want to look down the line 10 years from now and look back and say, did we really make the right decision when we did this cover for this day? So like I said, there are a lot of meetings with a lot of different editors, photo editors, sports editor. Matt's going to be pushing me on Monday because I'm running the paper on Monday. He's going to lobby to me because I'm an old sports guy. so it's a lot of different people are involved in making the decision for the front page. But Monday night is my night to guide that process.
And the Titanic.
And yeah, exactly. We were just saying, look at the bottom of the, was it pandemic?
Quarantine.
Quarantine, we're talking about quarantines, and we're going through that now.
Coverage on Russia as well.
Yeah. So it's funny.